Coming up, one last look at the biggest game of the season for the New York Football Giants, maybe the biggest game in 5-10 years for Big Blue, as they will take on the Commanders in Washington with playoff implications just all across the lines here. We break it down, give our predictions, some key fantasy takeaways, all coming up next. Yes, my friends. It is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, as you know, we are your host over here, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants here, and the Locked On Nets podcast for the Brooklyn Nets there with my boy Doug Norrie, and of course, joined by Andy Makowitz, the healthy, wealthy, and wise, the season generational ticket holder, the solo crossover extraordinaire. How are we, sir?
I'm doing good. Every single minute that goes by, I get more antsy, nervous, and excited for this game coming up on Sunday night. Feels like all the chips have been pushed into the middle of the table, especially with the way the Giants played last week. I am just gearing up for Sunday Night Football. It's been a while since the Giants have had a relevant game in December, Adam.
Well, we are going to talk about that game, of course, obviously, but there's some information got out there on the crossover that you did leading up to this game with George on Full Press Commanders. Is that correct? I have that right?
Yep.
Yeah, I knew it. And the interesting thing, though, before we get to that, because Giants fans are going to turn. They're going to turn on Andy very quickly in this episode. But last night was maybe equally as critical a game for the New York Football Giants because San Francisco 49ers playing the Seattle Seahawks. We know that Seattle obviously had the edge against the Giants in the head-to-head matchup. Seattle loses, and in doing so, immediately puts the Giants into that 7th seed right now, with the Commanders just ahead of them. Whoever wins the game is obviously going to vault or fall there. But guess what? The Giants could lose on Sunday night and still be ahead of the Seattle Seahawks in the standings because of what? The tie from 2 weeks ago against these Commanders. So, like, the value of that tie keeps your winning percentage slightly above 500 as opposed to where Seattle is right now. So already on the surface, one of the two dominoes that you're hoping would fall has already taken place. The second of which is going to be watching that Detroit Lions game. If they win, they're in the same position as Seattle, 7-7, right behind us, nipping at our heels, depending on what happens on Sunday night. But if you're looking for a little bit of, good luck, something the Giants haven't had over the last several weeks, you're at least getting it in the other games that are happening around the NFL.
Yeah, the Giants got very fortunate. I wouldn't even say that last night they got fortunate. I would say the Giants got fortunate last Sunday. Really was the big game when Seattle lost at home to the Carolina Panthers. Like
Surging Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, they're in the graphic that says in the hunt for their division. So clearly they have relevant games going on right now.
People are betting on, people are saying that they're going to do it, that they're going to catch those Tampa Bay Buccaneers and win this division. And who knows, maybe 8-9, but that they will get the job done.
It really is unbelievable when you think about it.
Yeah.
I was just I was looking at some of the different statistics, as you mentioned. Seattle losing for the Giants was huge. Seattle losing to both Carolina and San Francisco was huge because, to your point, whichever team on Sunday night ends up losing the game, they are still in the playoffs if the season were to start at the end of Sunday night, which is incredible. But, we thought about a couple of weeks ago, man, Seattle's just going to get 1 or 2 more wins and they're basically a lock. So this is the finale for the be all end all. It's not anymore, Adam. And Seattle doesn't have, as this season starts to wind down, the games we thought that they were going to get, they're probably not going to get. Look at, Seattle has to go next week to the Kansas City Chiefs. That's not going to be an easy one for them. After that, they host the Jets at home, who with Mike White look like they are a playoff team. So that's not one that you can count as a win. And then the last week of the season is against the Rams, where if the playoffs are on the line, you'd hope that they would be able to come play. But the Giants are in a really good spot. Whichever team wins on Sunday night will basically be 1.5 games up on the playoff picture, which gives you a lot of cushion going into the final 3 games. Winner basically says, win me 1 more of your 3 games and you're in the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, obviously 8 wins maybe is the ceiling potentially for the Seattle Seahawks. Obviously, these games lose large. Listen, we share the stadium with them. The Jets defense is really what gets you excited about their team if you're a fan of the Jets. And that's what should get you excited if you're a Giants fan rooting for the Jets. Because if you can slow down the Seattle offense, if you can disrupt them, like we saw the 49ers capable very much so of doing, that's the game script that works. It's not like Seattle is going to come out and get you 2 or 3 turnovers in a game and really make this a mess. Although the Jets keep toying with the idea of bringing Zach Wilson back into the QB fold, and that might be a recipe for disaster. Just a note quickly here, too, with that big Detroit Lions game, obviously, that's going to be against those New York Jets at the stadium in East Rutherford. And then they have Carolina, Chicago, and Green Bay. It's if they win on Sunday, then I think that they become the new biggest concern. If both teams are 7-7 behind that last wild card spot, I look at their schedule. I also look at just the way their offense plays, and you say, hey, the Chicago game very winnable. The Green Bay game could be very winnable, although you expect Green Bay, as Aaron Rodgers keeps saying, if we can go on a bit of a run here, to at least be competitive. Maybe the Carolina one becomes the most difficult, but as it stands right now, like, it's not out of the realm that you're going to be seeing a 9-win Detroit Lions team, and that's still going to be threading the needle for the New York Football Giants. It means that 8-1 will not be good enough. That 9th win is going to be critical still.
What's fascinating, and maybe this is just me as a betting man who likes to look at the odds and see what Vegas is telling you.
Mm-hmm.
The Detroit Lions have a better chance or better odds to win the NFC than the Giants do. And the Detroit Lions
they're playing better football, though. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
Oh, but of course. But if you think about it, the Detroit Lions have to win all of the rest of their games in order to get in. The Giants basically have to beat Washington in one game and may still be able to limp into the playoffs. And still, Detroit has a better chance to be able to win the NFC, which I just thought was fascinating. I get the story behind it. In terms of why.
Teams that may not even make the playoffs have a better chance to win the NFC than the Giants.
Correct. The Giants are even money to make the playoffs. You can have plus money on Detroit at plus 240. You can get 2.5 to 1 on your money if you think Detroit can make the playoffs. And what they're saying is, regardless of what team makes the playoffs, Detroit is more dangerous than the Giants because of their potent offense. And can you really blame them? They beat the Giants. They're hot right now. They just beat the Vikings. Look out, to your point, Seattle's starting to slowly flounder. Look at Detroit coming up, playing some big games down the stretch.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. 1, 2, 3, 4. They lost 5 in a row, going back to Minnesota, Seattle, New England, Dallas, Miami. They lost 5 in a row. And then they turned around. And by the way, you get fat on your schedule when you can. They beat Green Bay, Chicago, the New York Giants, lost to Buffalo, and then beat Jacksonville and beat Minnesota. Like, the bottom line is, and when you look at their scorecard there and you're seeing 34, 40, 31 points in their wins, like, that's what it is, man. They can dump a lot of points on you very quickly. They play really good football right now. I will say this too, and I know we're kind of going far afield here. We're going to get into this game because, spoiler, Andy called for the Giants to lose. So go ahead and let that one settle in. It's funny that Seattle, who lost, and Detroit, objectively, they're two teams that I would have wanted to see make the playoffs. Geno Smith, right? Like, finally gets a chance to be the leader of a team, goes out and, like, it's a good story. Detroit Lions, just historically, they've been terrible for so long. Jared Goff, the discarded scraps of the Matt Stafford trade. Now, all of a sudden, they're putting up points the way the Rams once dreamed that they could this season, right? Like, you want to see these teams there, and you're like, but maybe next year for you guys. Maybe next year's the year for you. That being the case, you did the crossover with George. It was a really good episode. It's up on our feed. We posted it up. Go support his show if you're a Commanders fan and you wandered over here. Really good stuff. I thought that it was a really good discussion you guys had from a lot of different angles, both like this game, this season, a little bit, bigger picture stuff as well. So be sure to go check that out. But at the end of it, Andy, we'll jump to the end of our usual prediction episode here, because you called for the Giants to lose 20-13, if I have that correct. Why so bullish on the Giants' inability to win this game?
I think it comes down to two very stark differences in these teams. One is that the Giants are not necessarily healthy across the board.
Yep.
Injuries have riddled this team throughout the season. Some were season ending that we seem to forget about, like guys like Wan'Dale Robinson, Sterling Shepard. It's been months since we said their name, but they were key cogs in the wheel to be able to help us get where we want to go. So injuries are an issue on the Giants side. You look at the Washington Commanders injury report, there was not a single player that did not participate in practice for the Washington Commanders. On top of that,
sorry, real
what's
quick.
Up? Hit me.
I'm scrolling through in the background just to see, like, I want to get the injury updates, to see if there's any news while we're doing this. Ellerson Smith got put on IR.
Yes.
And I just got to say his name for the first time last week of like, hey man, remember we haven't been able to say his name in a while, but he comes in, little special teams. Here we go. He's not playing anymore. So
yeah, it was like a sore Achilles calf situation. And so, there was a little bit of an issue, and they had to put him on IR, season ending, just when we hear his name get a punt block. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, maybe he could be a complimentary pass rusher. He's out again for the season. You're like, okay, great.
And by the way, Ryder Anderson got elevated to the 53, and it's his third time coming up. I saw this the other day. So he officially gets a contract. What from camp invite to now getting paid and being actually be on the remainder of the season for the New York Football Giants. That could be a little bit of a desperation move for the Giants with the injuries, but you tip your cap to a guy that's really fought his way onto that 53. But continue.
No, though. I mean, talking about Ryder, I think that's a wonderful story to talk about. When he got elevated and he's now on the active roster, people in the building, people in the locker room were genuinely happy for him because they've seen him throughout camp work, stay committed, join the practice squad, be around this team. Hugs, excitement. Everyone was really feeling him being activated. So good story for the Giants there. When we talk about why currently I kind of think Washington is the favorite, obviously going into this game, is they've basically not only had a week off and they have no one on the injury report, but also they've had 3 weeks to game plan for the Giants. You have the week leading up to the last game, you have the bye week, and then you have this upcoming week that they've had to rest everyone and get prepared for the Giants. It's really hard when a team comes off a bye and they've got 2 weeks to prepare for you. It's even harder when you're injured and they've had 3 weeks to prepare for what your team is trying to do against them.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think, like, and this is again, I'll take all the pressure off of Andy being called the bad man on the podcast. Like I've been, injuries are of course a big factor of it, but I've been talking about this for weeks. When you look at the big matchups, when you look at the weapons that certain teams have, those are the games that the Giants have struggled in all season long. And the weird thing is, too, you talk about from an injury front. Listen, Leonard Williams is going to be back out there. You expect you're going to get everything from Saquon Barkley, obviously. But the reality of Adoree Jackson and what goes on with him here, I've been curious about this because they've been in between about whether or not he would be able to get back or not. And then they're kind of saying, well, and also you got to think about the rest of the season, because if you bring him back too soon, or, he ends up tweaking something, and then you lose him for the rest of the year, well, then what happens? And it's weird because I'm fine with that approach about, hey, the season in totality. But we talked about this before the Washington game, going back to that Dallas matchup previous. Then we talked about it in the Philly game. We're talking about it again this week. The Giants gave every indication that they were putting all of their eggs into the Washington Commanders 2-game basket. And now seemingly they're doing this dance where they're like, or maybe not, though. Maybe there's more here. And I get it. You should be influenced by what's going on behind you. Seattle losing should matter. If Detroit loses, that should matter because you can still get there. But guess what? I don't have confidence right now in any game that the Giants are taking the field because they haven't shown me that they're capable of playing high-level football. You go back to 2 weeks ago against the Commanders, it's a tie. I know you can point to some really bad plays and the referees, etc. Okay, you can. But guess what? It happens every single week around the NFL, and I could list 6 other times over the course of this season where it didn't look bad for the Giants, or maybe they got a little bit lucky, whatever the case may be. I just don't have a high level of confidence that this team has made a decisive decision around the way they're approaching these games and what they want to accomplish. Because if they were, this would be every single player's out there in whatever capacity they can, and we live with the results. Because if you win this game, you're all but in the playoffs. If you hedge your bets and you lose it, then you still have to go do something in order to make sure you get in there.
So a lot to unpack there, because I do find it fascinating. You started with Adoree Jackson, and I think that's a good place to start this conversation, Adam. So Adoree Jackson gets hurt returning punts, right? And what's funny is that was the first knee-jerk reaction or big misstep that I think Brian Daboll and the coaching staff had was, why are we putting our number one cornerback back there on a high risk, very little reward situation? That felt like a knee-jerk reaction, which
Yeah.
we haven't seen very much from the coaching staff. They have been very methodical in all of the things that they've done. Now, look, if you look at what Joe Shane did at the trade deadline, nothing. He stood pat. He said, we're going to build this thing slow. We're not going to mortgage the future. We're going to continue to build this thing. And hopefully, maybe clumsily, we'll just fall into a few more wins and make the playoffs. You look at Adoree Jackson. It has been exactly 4 weeks since he had that knee injury.
Yeah.
They said the timeline on his knee injury was 4 to 6 weeks, right? So we're at the beginning of it. We're so used to them under promising, over delivering, and guys coming back faster.
Right.
But keep in mind, Adoree Jackson is still in that window. And so for me, I think the Giants are just saying, we're not making any knee-jerk reactions, literally, with Adoree Jackson's knee. If he's not ready, we can't put him out there. And the only way that it happens is if Adoree Jackson is banging on a drum saying, get me the medical staff. I will do any drill that you want me to prove that I'm in there. If not, then you have to continue to sit him until he's prepared, which is what it sounds like the Giants are doing.
Well, by the way, I'm fine. I'm fine with that. Like, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with the Giants not making the playoffs this year. Like, let me just be clear. I want them to, but I'm fine with them not making, because you make the great point. At the deadline, you didn't go and make a marginal move to improve the team, right? You understood financially everything else that's going on. You actually jettisoned a player in Kadarius Toney, right? You see the state of the wide receiver room. You know that you could have gone and maybe made a little small move here, a little small move there to try to improve it. Instead, you stayed in-house. You've elevated guys from the practice squad. You've rotated through injuries. Khalil Pimpleton is again getting talked about being very elusive in the return game, and whether or not maybe they'll try to get him a look down the stretch of the season, which, by the way, like I'm a little fan of his because I like the underdog story, but also you should see what he can do for you before the year is over, because it kind of matters if he can be a fringe player for you next season or not. And this goes for every position. But again, like, I don't care. Like, you don't need to make the playoffs, but I do need you to be consistent. And that's the thing. As soon as they started saying about not focusing on the Dallas game and trying to evaluate and win that game because they were looking ahead to that first Washington matchup, that's the first time that you stopped doing things in the same methodical approach that you had taken all year and started to shift your gears a little bit. And I get it. You win, you go 6-1 to start a season. You start to think there's something here. You can give the fan base a little bit of a nice boost here by making the playoffs. And I think they probably still will, even if they lose this Washington game. But it doesn't feel the same that it did, right? It doesn't feel the way it did in the first half of the year now making the playoffs. This feels more like a team that has a lot of injuries, has a lot of holes on their roster, has a long way to go, and we're just kind of dragging this carcass across the NFL playoff, finish line.
It feels like when you're a fan of the game and your team is winning and you drop back into prevent defense and the other team is just like
taking
moving
chunks.
The ball consistently down the field. You're like, can somebody get a stop here? Can we like throw maybe one guy at the quarterback? Like, what is happening? It feels like the Giants are slowly being like, we're just not going to lose the game on our own accord. Let's see Seattle dump a game to Carolina. Let's see them lose to San Francisco. Let's see Detroit lose to the Jets. Like, we'll just kind of sit here and we'll tie Washington. Right? Like,
maybe we tie again. Maybe we just tie again another game, right?
Let's be pull again for another one, right?
Let's be 7-5-2. If we look at this, by the way, too, because I want to go back to, I know it was 2020, that last time that these two teams met. On the one hand, you could look at it and say, Heineke, 27-41, 275, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, got sacked 5 times. So the pressure is definitely there to be had. He didn't make glaring mistakes. He had a fumble in this one, too, if I'm not mistaken. Each QB did in this one. So if there is a mistake inside of that, you could make the case that he won't play as clean potentially. But I go inside some of the other stats here, and you think about, Brian Robinson going 21 for 96, Gibson 9 for 39, Curtis Samuel getting used the way we like to try or think about using our receivers in that run game, 3 for 23. Like, that's going to happen again. Like, some iteration of that running attack is going to look the same. Leonard Williams can make a difference in that regard, but where Leonard Williams doesn't make a difference is when the running is going out on the edges and getting out in space. And that's the bigger concern inside of that run game. We know the Giants have given up 160 yards every single game the last 4 weeks in terms of rush defense. Then you go inside the wide receiver room. Okay, Terry McLaurin, 8 for 105. If Adoree Jackson's back out there, makes a big difference. We all understand that. But if he's not out there, it's going to be more of the same. And if he is out there, You still have this trickle down effect, man. 6 for 63 for Samuel, 5 for 54 for Dotson, 2 for 20 for Gibson, 3 for 20 for Thomas. Like, I just looked down that last box score between these two teams, and I understand the last couple of penalties. Yeah, they could have won the game. Great. They could have won the game. Guess what? Washington also could have scored 30 points in that game. Like, and I just mean to say, you're coming in on even footing. And I don't know if you can look at this and look at the key areas of matchups, right? Offensive line to offensive line, it's probably about the same. There's injuries, there's good play, there's bad play. Trenches to trenches, it's probably about the same. And you could make the case that the interior of Washington of late, without Leonard Williams, obviously for us, has maybe been more effective. And they're getting back Chase Young, and he may be able to contribute in this. And then you get to the secondaries. No, neither one of them is great, but flip the script. Their wide receiver core and weapons is so much stronger than the Giants is right now. I mean, in a lot of ways, I'm going to come back to Darius Slayton, Daniel Bellinger. Like, those to me, those are going to be the guys that I'm looking at and thinking about here, barring some miracle where Kenny Golladay knocks off the dust and starts becoming a football player again.
Yeah, Adam, I mean, the other thing that I keep thinking about and I keep going back to is I was in the stands for that Washington Commanders Giants
That's
game.
right.
And I watched every single time Daniel Jones dropped back or they were handing it off to Saquon Barkley, that our interior offensive line was getting dominated. It wasn't even like, oh, a missed tackle here, we missed one play here. It was every single play, the pressure was coming up the middle. And what that does is it forces Saquon on all of his runs to have to jump cut or stop early and not get momentum. He's basically making his move 3 or 4 yards behind the line of scrimmage, which is never going to be helpful. And when Daniel Jones is trying to look downfield to throw the big play, he's got pressure coming directly into his face, which makes it a challenge. And watching that consistently happen over and over and over again, the biggest problem, Adam, is we have no recourse for that. The same thing can potentially happen in this game because we don't necessarily have all these reinforcements coming in. Now, Ben Bredesen sounds like he's going to be healthy. He's coming off, he's activated off IR. He may help slightly, but again, just even across all of our guards and centers, we just don't have the talent to handle guys like Darren Payne and Jonathan Allen. Like, those are two of the best interior linemen in the league. They give the Dexter Lawrence Leonard Williams 1-2 punch a run for their money.
Yeah, and it's funny too. So the couple, and I agree with you. And I want to talk about Daniel Jones here in a second to close things out in a very specific way. But I was just noting too when I went back and looked. Remember, just to balance the books here a little bit, and a 52-yard field goal is not a chip shot by any chance, by any stretch of the imagination. But Sly missed that for them over on Washington's side at the end, going to the fourth quarter there on what was a 12-play, 60-yard drive, ending the third and going into the fourth. And then let me just go into this kind of makes your point too. 3 plays, -5 yards, punt for the Giants. Washington punt. 4 plays, -2 yards, Giants punt. Touchdown for Washington. 3 plays, 0 yards, punt. Washington punt. End of the like you can slice it however you want around what didn't go well or if they could and what the defense is going to have to deal with. The offense had 3 consecutive series and 4 out of 5 series where they were getting 0 yardage and they were punting the ball away. And it's a combination of the areas where we lack and then the strengths of Washington right now. And just, again, Washington is surging. That's what Washington has been doing of late, right? They have won. I can't remember what it is. I think they've won 4 out of their last 5 games, if I'm not mistaken.
6 of 7.
6 of 7. You know what I mean? So it's again, like, this goes back to that old thing that I want to get to Daniel Jones of like, hey, the wins, whenever you can get them, you take them. Yes. Why are not all wins created equal? Because when you go 6-1 to start the season, it's great. But when you talk about momentum and building towards the playoffs and being healthy and all those other factors, it kind of matters more when it's happening at the end of the year, when not only are you winning games that are going to get you into the playoffs, but then what your expectations are if you can get there.
Well, I mean, look, the simple thing that I'll say is there is still time for the momentum to turn for the Giants if they can get
100%.
this win. You kind of go through the 6-1 where you're the talk of the town, Dayball Coach of the Year. Look at how great we are. And we've kind of gone through this swoon. If we win this game against Washington and pick off one other game, we are going to the playoffs. If we go 2-2 or 3-1 somehow in the last 4 games of the season, Adam, that's enough momentum to be like, all right, if the Giants go on the road to, I don't know, Tampa Bay, like, do you think they've got a puncher's chance to win that game? I do.
Well, that's gonna be Carolina. That's gonna be
Or Carolina, who
no, I'm
they've
kidding.
already beaten so far
Yeah,
this
yeah, yeah.
season. Like I have confidence that they could go into one of those types of games and win. Now, if we're talking about going to San Francisco or Philadelphia or Dallas, might be a little bit of a taller task. But to this point, there's still enough games left in the regular season where the Giants could get right, and this offense and the defense gets a little bit healthier with Adoree Jackson coming back. Maybe there's a chance where we can kind of move back to the upswing.
Yeah, well, obviously we're going to catch that bye week in the first round of the playoffs for the number 1 seed with the addition of the second wild card spot. So you are talking about, as it stands right now, you'd be talking about San Francisco, Minnesota, right? Those are the places that you're going to travel to in that first week. If you're the 7th seed, if you fight your way to the 6th, like you said, maybe get one of those more interesting matchups. But that all plays itself out, right? And just to your point, I will just acknowledge, like, it could all start here. You go on the road and you beat Washington. And we went back a couple episodes ago when I said about that alternate universe and how Minnesota is a team that's hanging on by a very thin thread every single week and just got beat by the Detroit Lions, who are playing really good football right now. Like, no, I don't think the Giants have, like, the offense doesn't tell you they can go toe to toe. But those next 3 weeks leading up to the finale against the Eagles, like, you can go 2-1 to your point. Maybe, it can change the tide. If you can make the final game against the Eagles meaningless for the Giants in terms of making the playoffs, now you get to rest your team and just hit that wild card game feeling like we'll give it everything we got. And to that end, I will say we've avoided, I think, for the most part, the last 6-7 weeks. We did a lot of it early in the season, and then we made a kind of a pact of we're going to stay away from the Daniel Jones debate about is he the quarterback or not the quarterback. We have our opinions on it. We're watching it, and we'll see what happens. This is a game where there's going to be pressure. They're going to be in his face. You don't have the perfect set of receivers. Okay. And everyone keeps pointing to Saquon Barkley needs to dial it back up. It's really hard for a running back, no matter how good you are, to dial it up. We've seen this over the years, right? When the offensive line was at their worst, Saquon Barkley's getting hit 3-4 yards behind the line of scrimmage. Nothing you can do about it. You can't mitigate that. But Daniel Jones can mitigate pressure with his legs. And if I'm looking at a game and I'm looking at the season effectively being on the line, I'll go back to that last time that these two teams met 2 weeks ago. Daniel Jones threw for 200 yards and ran for 71 on 12 carries. It wasn't a great QBR for him in that matchup, but that's what it's going to have to take for me. I need Daniel Jones to take over this game in a way that a franchise quarterback takes over a pivotal game for their team. Listen, if at the end of this one, there's 5 drops by the wide receiving core in key spots, so be it. Like, then a lot of the blame will not fall anywhere near Daniel Jones' feet. But I need him being mobile, stepping up in the pocket, avoiding pressure, getting out on the edge, being decisive, making the quick right reads. And guess what? If there's 3 deep passes that he has a chance to make in this game, I need every one of them to be on a dime. And then I'll judge the results on the other end on the receivers. But I need him to be what everyone has said they think he can be. What a lot of Giants fans say, he can be the franchise quarterback. This is a game where you can go and prove that to me. Like, this is kind of an all-in, stakes have never been higher kind of moment on Sunday Night Football. Go show it to me. Like, and I want that for him. I want him to do it. And I think that he can. But this would be a great example where I will come out of it saying, like, hey, they can win this game through a variation of ways that won't change my opinion about Daniel Jones. But the one way that they can is if Daniel Jones just goes out and rips it, like, and shows you that he can beat a team. Washington's a good team. They're not a great team. They're a good team, and they're standing in between you and the playoffs.
Yeah, Adam, it's funny because I have a different perspective on it. I can understand that Daniel Jones has actually been amazing at FedEx Field in his career. 9 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, has played really well against Washington. Has been 2-1. Obviously, you had that Darius Slayton drop in week 2 last year where if fingertips were on it, you felt like the game was over if you could catch it. He couldn't come up with it. I actually have a different perspective on what I need from this game. I need Wink Martindale to wake up. Like, I need him to look at his defense and say, you were embarrassed last week. That was embarrassing at home against a division rival. We need everyone, all hands on deck. Adam, we have given up 20 or more points in all 4 of our last games, which has become 4 losses. Against the Detroit Lions, we gave up 31. Against the Eagles, we gave up 48. Against the Cowboys, we gave up 28. And then we had our tie, which is 20. We know.
What's your version of it waking up?
Um,
because the secondary can't wake up. If Adoree Jackson isn't playing, there's no one to wake up in the secondary.
Well, but the way that we talk about Daniel Jones having to take over this game with no offensive linemen and no wide receivers available to him,
and I'm
saying like if we're gonna say that, we can't say that the defense can't wake up. The defense has to play better than what they have been playing the last 4 weeks. That's
I know, I 100% agree with you. But my 2 points are: one, on the defensive side, it's Leonard Williams, Dexter Lawrence, Azeez Ojulari, Kayvon Thibodeau, 4 players. Go get it done. And we saw Thibodeau almost got home. Could have had that sack fumble on Heineke. Like, I agree with you. They got to wake up. My point was just, the secondary can wake up, and waking up for them is going to be, hey, we'll hold them to 20 or 24 points, because that's what we are in the secondary right now. If you don't have Adoree Jackson, the way you stop those weapons for Washington is by getting to Heineke quicker, stopping those plays from developing properly.
Just quick for me. That's where I slightly differ from you on this, on the defensive side. The Giants are just getting carved like a Thanksgiving turkey in the run game. And there has to be a commitment to say, we are not going to lose by them methodically moving the ball down the field. Time of possession is of the utmost value to Washington. They are number 1 in the entire league in time of possession. They like moving the football on the ground. The Giants have been embarrassed in the run game the last 4 weeks. There has to be a kind of a gut check with everyone around. Jihad Ward was saying it. Everyone has been talking a big game this week about how important this game is. The defense needs to come in and say, we are stopping the run. And then what does that do? It says, Taylor Heineke, drop back and beat us. He's one of the slowest to get it out of his hands. Their offensive line isn't great. And that's where tremendous things can happen from guys like Ojulari and Thibodeau. So for me, it's all about Wink Martindale looking around the room and saying, they will not beat us running the ball. If Taylor Heineke throws a deep ball and somehow connects, I will live with that, but I am not going to let them just pound us into the ground.
I agree with you, but like, nothing about the Giants season suggests they're capable of stopping the run. Like, they haven't done it all year. And then
there's not, then they don't have an opportunity to win the game, because the games where they have stopped the run are games that they have won this season. So
that's not true though. They lost to Seattle, stymieing the run game. They were good against Seattle against the run. They gave up a ton of passing yards. They were good against the Ravens against the run. They gave up, like, it doesn't matter. That, like, I agree with you. Like, hey, you got to be better against the run. Like, what's the deal here? My point is, in terms of like impact plays, you don't often get. You can stuff the run, and then you can force them into a passing situation. And I agree. If they're, who's the riskier play? Hey, I'll take my chances that Heineke might throw a lame duck up there, right? But we know all the weapons that they have inside of the wide receiver room, and you don't typically get a lot of turnovers manufactured in stuffing the run game. But if I can get them drop, and by the way, it's kind of a chicken and the egg here, because if you stuff the run early enough and Heineke starts to drop back, now you can get the pressure and maybe get those strip fumbles. So, I mean, we're probably circling it in the same ways. I just look at it as, it's hard for me to, yes, you got to stop the run. But when I look at it, I go, but you haven't even shown being capable of doing that. There has been times when this secondary has been able to do enough, when the defensive front has been able to get enough pressure early in a game where you say, okay, we're working this balancing act. And
this is why it's so critical to get Leonard Williams back, because our run defense is night and day without him. With him, we're about 2 yards per carry less than what we are without him, which teams know that.
You can't double up on Dexter. You can't be patient on that. And the presence of Azeez being back out there too with Thibodeau, it matters. Like, you are eliminating the double team opportunities for most offenses.
Yeah, and we know that our secondary is limited. We know the linebacking position is not our strength right now. Clearly, we're going to be addressing those in the offseason. But really, for me, look, the Giants offense, we know their limitations. We know that it's going to be a struggle. It's been a struggle all year to get over 20 points. So if we know that that's going to be the dogfight that we're in, the best path is to not let them have time of possession, methodically move the ball down the field. I know it's difficult because we haven't been able to do it, or you haven't seen it. But to me, it's kind of like a gut check where Wink's like, are you in or are you out? Like we have to give the most effort we possibly can into stopping the run, and we'll live with the consequences.
Yeah, and then I just wanted to touch briefly back on the other side where you said, offensive line is terrible, or, it's both sides, whatever. Remember, I mean, like, this is that part of Evan Neal, and we made this comparison before. I said it's marginally better than some of the backups that were filling in when he was out. He's a rookie. I'm not holding it against him. Andrew Thomas is there, though. Maybe Ben Bredeson plays. Unfortunately, Nick Gates has been a mixed bag. Feliciano, I think, has mostly been good. He has a couple of high-profile mistakes, which include like mental errors. Maybe we talk about the penalty he took 2 weeks ago. But Glowinski is actually the guy that really bothers you. And the hardest part about the offensive line for the Giants right now is that it's kind of like in every other in terms of where the skill set is, right? Evan Neal struggles more in pass protection, but he's good in the run. Glowinski kind of gets beat up because he's not a big enough boy in the run game, but he holds up in pass protection. Feliciano, grounder and pounder. Then down the line you go, right? The only guy that does it in all phases is Andrew Thomas. And guess what? You can't run behind one player the entire game. So it's a part of the growing process for this team. And I think it'll be interesting to see how this game plays out and really how the rest of the season goes. You had this at 23-20 in terms of your prediction as we kind of get to the
2013. 2013.
What did I say?
You said 23-20. You were saying more points to be scored. I think it's going to be a lower scoring.
That might be my score prediction. Maybe that's where I was getting to. But 20-13 was Andy's prediction. The Giants losing. We'll find out after this game, depending on what the outcome is, if Andy saw that as a pause on getting to the playoffs or if this is the downward trend for them. Listen, man, if you want this season to have the value that you want it to have, I think it's like not even about the playoffs. It's about a divisional game that means something late in the season for your team. I think you have to find a way to go out and win it. And again, I'm going to put this on my expectation of Daniel Jones and whether or not he can be a franchise quarterback. I get it. Weapons and lines and defenses and everything else. It's a team game. You need to be able to go out when Taylor Heineke is standing across from you and win the football game. Like that's the bottom line. If Aaron Rodgers went up against, by the way, when Purdy beat Tom Brady, we all went, Jesus, that's a bad look. And you don't think about the team totality and what went on and how bad Tampa Bay is. You always go back to the quarterback. And they got absolutely dumpstered in that game. When you look at the QBs in a game, you think, who's the better quarterback? That team should have the better chance to win. I want Daniel Jones to give me the exact same line maybe from 2 weeks ago. Give me 20 more rushing yards. I want you to give me 100 rushing yards this game because that's what it's going to take because they're going to shut down Saquon Barkley. They showed that they can do that. I'd like to see them use Saquon Barkley more in the receiving game. Abandon him in the running game for certain stretches of this. Stretch the field. 2 weeks ago, they made 1-2 pass attempts deep down the field. We said, yes, more of that, do more. And then they shut all of it down until late in the game when they took a shot down the sideline and maybe a penalty wasn't thrown. Don't care about if this makes or misses the playoffs for you. Care about making a statement about what your team could be and around what Daniel Jones could be. I'm calling for the Giants to win this game 23-20. I snuck it in there earlier. I think they can do that. That is a 2-score, maybe 3 field goal kind of effort from this team. I need them to be controlling the time of possession for some of this game. And I also just need Daniel Jones to flat out be balling out. Give me one of those games. Haven't really had one of those all season long. You want to be a franchise quarterback, you need to have a couple of signature moments in the season. Let a lot of fourth quarter comebacks, but guess what? They don't mean anything if your team peters out and misses the playoffs and you're kind of a passenger on that journey. I believe in Daniel Jones in this game. I believe in the Giants 23-20.
At the end of the day, Adam, I love your prediction. We'll basically be close to wrapping up a playoff spot. You'll have your franchise quarterback for next season. Everything seems to work out if Daniel Jones goes out, takes this by the horns, and wins this game.
In spite of, right? In spite of it. Doesn't matter. Drop passes, bad blocking, everything else. Daniel Jones goes and wins this game. Get us over on YouTube where you'll hear me gloating after this victory in front of Andy when the Giants wrap up almost a playoff spot on Sunday Night Football, prime time matchup, YouTube, podcast feeds, wherever you get those needs fulfilled. Help us get to 2,000 subscribers. We really appreciate it. And as always, now, more than ever, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.